Welcome, Dr. Michael Walker. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
As I discussed with you before, I really want to take a deep dive in getting to know you better. You and I have spent the last 3 or 4 months really taking a deep dive into coaching and your educational background, your leadership background. But I want to know you as a person today to start off our discussion today. Where are you from originally?
Interesting question for me to answer. And so
That was a softball, Mike.
yeah, I'll answer with a mosaic and then we'll fill in the blanks. But I was born in Australia. I grew up in Mexico City. I raised my family in Honolulu, Hawaii. But I'm now happily back actually in Nashville. But along the way, also have lived in San Francisco, had a short time in Denver. So I've moved around for a long time. Mexico City really felt like home, and my wife is Hispanic. We grew up there together. One of those high school sweetheart stories. Uh,
Nice.
yeah, her family is still in Mexico City, and then Hawaii resonated beautifully. We had 17 wonderful years in Hawaii. Um, and then now back on, as they say in Hawaii, back on the continent.
But had you lived in Nashville at one point along the way?
We were here in Nashville almost 25 years ago. Our children were young, and I was at University School of Nashville at that point, and really liked it here. And then we went from here to Honolulu. When I was given that opportunity, my wife and I, we got a babysitter. We went out for lunch. I had legal pads, rulers, calculators. We were going to make a very informed decision about moving our family to Hawaii. We hadn't even ordered iced tea yet, and we said, we're going to Hawaii.
It was easy.
That was an easy decision, a very easy decision, and a good decision.
Yeah. And was she a school teacher as well?
So we're both, educators and started our life in education. We actually met working at a camp back
Mm.
in high school and continued that all the way on in college. It was in Mexico City, and we would go back in the summers. And then even we went back to Mexico City to begin our careers. And again, that was home. My wife's family was there. So that work, a man in our lives who was very significant and ran the camp, and I was involved in the Boy Scouts at that point, and we ran summer camps. And then we've both been educators, and so she and I worked in the same schools. She's also an artist, a ceramicist, and so that's been a huge part of her life. And a visit to the Walker home would reveal the artistic inclinations of my wife.
Nice. That's a bonus.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Wow.
And how did you start off? How did you start your career?
We have these distinct memories throughout our life, and some of them stand out. I remember when I was in the fifth grade, and back in the day, you remember the activities where we would climb up the rope to the ceiling
Yeah,
of the gym?
right.
Schools, don't do that anymore because it's deemed a liability. But I remember climbing up that rope, and I think by the time I came down, I remember thinking that I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be an educator, and I thought it might be at that point a physical PE teacher. But also, I graduated from a boarding school in Washington, Connecticut, and had a phenomenal experience there, athletically, academically, some amazing teachers. And I remember I went up to the headmaster after graduation and told him that I'd like to come back and teach. And I still remember this. He looked at me with sincerity. I know the twinkle in his eye, and he said, "Well, go off and get some experience, and we'll talk about it." But actually, my senior year, I did an independent study, and I worked with a student at a school that was in the area, and I was teaching him Spanish. It was one-on-one, and then I wrote a paper on that. But that had a huge impact on me, and I also think my work at camp. So I was pretty clear on what I wanted to do, and why I've spent a life in schools.
Mhm. And so then you began your education, your formal education. What did that look like?
I always looked for alternative activities. I graduated from boarding school in Connecticut and then went to college in Michigan, Western Michigan University. My family was from Michigan, from Detroit. My dad was with General Motors. That's what took us to Mexico City when I was 11 years old. Um, and so, but he'd been centered in Michigan before that. So, Western Michigan University had a ranked college of education, but I also was admitted into the honors college. And that was a small college within a large university. And again, these very meaningful learning opportunities. We used to have, I remember I had an English literature class that was held in the basement. The honors college had a house just on the side of campus and had a professor who invited us to his house to make pasta. And we would sit in the basement of that house and discuss literature and just these powerful, compelling learning experiences.
And intimate, intimate. There was a closeness to you, to your professors, as well as student to student.
I think for me, it really highlighted the value and the power of learning in a group in that way.
Hmm.
That we would sit together and felt comfortable sharing. And again, those classes, what the honors college did for me is put me in a series of classes of 10 to 15 students. And I really feel that that was the optimal environment in which to learn. The boarding school I graduated from, it was similar. I mean, we'd sit around a table of 15 students or so and really immerse ourselves in deep learning.
And then where did you go from there?
So, Wendy and I, we had a long distance relationship. We met at the camp as I went off to boarding school in Connecticut, and she was at the American high school. I was, again, high school students. We went to colleges in different cities, graduated from different colleges, but had a relationship. And we'd go back to Mexico City and work in the camps in the summer.
Nice.
We had a deep relationship with the founders of the camp and felt that that work was very meaningful. And then we graduated, we went back to Mexico City. I mean, that was really home and got jobs at the International School, the American School Foundation in Mexico City.
Hmm.
Uh, and just thrived in that culture. And it was a hard decision to leave, but graduate school called, and the University of South Carolina had a master's program for international educators.
Hmm.
The associate dean had gotten very interested in the international schools, and so again put together a cohort of educators that had been working in schools from around the world and had colleagues who became friends that had been in Asia, Africa, Europe, had made their whole careers overseas. And that was really our plan. I was actually offered, when we finished our master's, offered an opportunity to go to Nairobi. We had a 3 month old, and my wife in particular thought better of it. Um, so that's what brought us to Nashville. I got a job here at University School of Nashville. It had been Vanderbilt's lab school, a very dynamic environment, and we loved then and came back to Nashville because it's a great place to live.
Yes, great. So then the opportunity came to you to move to Hawaii. Is that correct?
It is correct. So a national search, and worked in independent schools my entire career. So search consultant. Um, you move through the process. I remember when I flew out to San Francisco for the semifinalist round, and you can tell that that went well, and then went out to Hawaii for the finals round. And so spent 17 years at Punahou School, largest independent school in the country, 3,700 students. I ran the K-8 school, 2,000 students, 160 teachers. It's where President Obama graduated from.
Yep.
So nothing like having your most famous alumni live in the White House. But the school is actually oldest independent school west of Mississippi. And again, what we were craving is just deep cultural connection. So place-based school. We raised our sons. They were young elementary students when we moved, and they both graduated. Actually, our oldest son lives in Hawaii. Now his daughter, our grandchild, was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. And just a warm, wonderful, beautiful culture in which to live, and it resonated with us as well. And of course, Punahou was fascinating.
Was this your first leadership experience?
No, it wasn't. When I finished my graduate program in administration at University of South Carolina, I knew I was looking for leadership opportunities.
Mm.
There's actually studies that show that people who are given leadership opportunities early in their lives are more likely to cultivate that. And when I look back, that was always the case with me, be it in the scouts or be it on athletic teams or be it in school. I had opportunities. Again, I remember when I was in high school, the headmaster, and I'm an introvert by nature and probably shy, and the headmaster of the school was prompting me to take on a speaker's role in an event, and I could feel how much of a challenge that was. Ironically, I ended up earning my living speaking. Uh, so you grow into it. But when I was at Hammond School in Columbia, South Carolina, I was teaching in the high school, finished up my degrees, and teacher contracts went out, and I didn't get one in my box, and I thought I was the young hotshot, and I got called in, and that conversation turned into an offer to become a division head, take on the middle school. I was 27, um, and I remember
Pretty young.
yeah, I remember my first meeting, looking around the room, and I, prepared for it all summer long. I had some plan. I was ready. I thought about the environment, but again, I remember that moment so distinctly that I was in a different position, but I craved the responsibility, uh,
Hmm.
and wanted to be involved in the strategic decisions. I think that's really was the focus. So I was 27 years old, and that was my first leadership opportunity,
Yeah.
leading people that had been my peers, and found myself um, in a great opportunity, and had good mentors. I mean, Dr. Herb Barks was the head of school, and
Right.
a great mentor to me.
Do you know where this comes from? This desire to grow, a desire to move into a leadership position. Do you know where that comes from for you?
When I look back at it, I before we moved to Mexico, I was a ice hockey player, and I was 11 years old at that point. But I remember that was the first I, I was appointed captain of the team,
Hmm.
and um, I felt the responsibility to provide the energy to get the team to perform at its best, and I loved it, and I loved what that meant. So I think that the other question to it is, I think that there are leadership tendencies that are innate, but I also think that leadership can undoubtedly be cultivated. And
Hmm.
throughout my career, particularly in the later stages, I made it a point. I really thought that main purpose of my role was to cultivate the next generation of leaders, and particularly when they were young and early in their career, to give them opportunities to take on responsibilities that enabled them to grow into the role.
I don't want to go too far down this path, but our discussion comes at a time where Mexico now has its first female president, its first Jewish president. These are pretty interesting and exciting times. for Mexico right now. Any comments, any thoughts about that? Because you keep referring back at that period of time as being, um, you know, just you love the environment of being and living and working in Mexico. That's what I heard from you.
Yeah. I've followed that election closely. She was inaugurated last week, and I watched her speak, and she's also an academic and a focus on energy and transformed and her she exudes the gracefulness of the culture that I love so much. And I know, I mean, the significance of a culture like Mexico to have a female leader. But I actually think where that comes from is this. When I was 11 years old in Mexico City, the first house we had, I mean, we went to the big international school, but we lived on the edge of the city because of where he was putting in automobile plants in Toluca, which is outside of Mexico City.
Yeah,
So our house was built onto this cliff, and there was a big, they call it barranca, there was a gully, and on the other side of it was a very impoverished part of Mexico City, and we could look right out and see it. And then, we had a big dog, German Shepherd, and one day I looked up and there was a bunch of kids, boys from the other side. And I guess they had seen our dog and they came over. But the result of that is at an early age, I was in the fifth grade, we became very good friends with these boys that lived in a very impoverished part of Mexico City. And down in the bottom of this gully, there was just dirt fields and deflated soccer balls. And we'd go down there and play soccer ball. That's how I learned to speak Spanish.
right.
They took us into their homes, and I got to see a part of Mexican culture that probably few do at an age where we were completely receptive and innocent to the impact. And what I saw in that was goodness. And what I saw was how their families held together. And I saw the values of the country in the midst of hardship. I mean, it was
Yeah,
a
right.
very hard, humble life. And I think that that's what imprinted me on it. So I'm optimistic. I mean, Mexico's got some hard challenges ahead of them that impact us, but I'm optimistic about the future.
Did you use the word graceful earlier, 5 minutes ago? Great, a culture that is graceful.
Graceful.
Yeah. And so I'd like to hear more about what that means. And is that where you learned it with the deflated soccer balls and being invited into homes and being receptive at an early age?
Yeah. A lot of what we read about um, Mexico today, literally this morning, I read an article about the drug cartels in Sinaloa
Yeah,
state
right.
and the violence, and that actually informed in part our hard decision to lead.
Right.
I'd also say what I've experienced there is, again, during those years, my fifth, sixth grade year, we were invited to a quinceañera, which is it's a festival celebrating, and so we were in one of the homes, and again, metal chairs and metal tables and tacos al pastor, and there was a music and band and dancing. And I remember they tried to pull the two gringo, my brother was with me in all these adventures, and tried to pull the two gringo boys into the dance. And there was a gentleness about it, and the fabric of that culture is held together by family, and there's such a strong sense of family. And so that's how the culture touched me. I mean, I was in circumstances that probably in other contexts would be considered very dangerous, but I never felt that.
Hmm.
Yeah, we went to parts of Mexico City with this group that were absolutely extraordinary. In hindsight, were we in danger? Probably, but I never felt it. And I got to see and care about a really special culture.
I want to hear more about that at a future date. I think that's, yeah, that's incredible. The experiences that you've had starting at a very early age. So now you've stepped up in Hawaii to a significant leadership challenge. And can you share more about that, please?
You know, Punahou School, I mean, an extraordinary school. You have the whole cultural context. A school founded by the Ali'i of Hawaii and missionaries who were there at that time, but just a pillar of the community and the world. And what I was exposed to there and what I was able to do was extraordinary. Um, and the cultural context of it, just being in Hawaii, and I think always been drawn to that, but also the work. And so, not by design, but for example, when I was here at University School of Nashville, my first experience in a major facility project we did in middle school, and that in part informed the work at Punahou School, and um, was there my second year there. And Steve Case, who alumni, founder of AOL, his father was on the board, and Steve very generously gave a gift, but wanted to build a world-class middle school,
Nice.
and so for 1,000 students. And so I'd had some preparation in the facilities project in University School of Nashville, where you really lead programmatically driven that what are the conditions in which children in an age group best learn. And so not only do we travel the country and the world really learning about how students best learn and what conditions create optimal opportunities for students, but then the whole design process. So programmatically driven design starts with the needs of students. Um, got to interact with the design school, the D school at Stanford University, brought design thinking processes into that. So there was an educational component to it. I've spent a lot of my career working with architects
Yeah.
on large scale, complex facility design process. The whole construction process is well. Punahou's board had top developers in Honolulu that were involved, and got to work with them on that. And then also fundraising. I mean,
Hmm.
I've done a significant amount of fundraising in my career, particularly at Punahou. We did a facility for 1,000 middle school students. And then we did the Omidyar K1 neighborhood for 300 kindergartners and first graders, and then did the design work for the Kosasa Elementary School while I was there. So it was not by design that I spent the better part of my career in facility design, management, creation, but it was the combination of very creative work anchored in research, but also very complex finances. Uh,
Hmm.
and then, frankly, the fundraising part of that. I loved meeting with people who were generous by disposition and helping them realize their philanthropic inclinations.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You and I talked about a mentor that you had while you were there, and you have a great deal of respect for one individual I know, and I'm sure there were others. Can you talk a little bit about that and how they influenced your growth and development?
Yeah, Dr. Jim Scott, president of Punahou School, alumni, descendant of Hawaiian Ali'i, um, Harvard educated, and not only did he teach me about um, school and fundraising and leading a large organization, um, but his ability to listen and to synthesize. I mean, I think Dr. Scott's greatest ability, I mean, it was large administrative team of dynamic individuals, and Our weekly meetings, there was deep and often impassioned engagement about possibilities. And Jim would sit at the end of the table and listen. I mean, just listen for an hour. And then literally in the last 5 to 10 minutes, in a poised, again, graceful voice, had the ability to synthesize complexity in a way that was just uncanny. And I
Mm.
saw him not only in our meetings, but in board meetings, the same. I mean, he would listen, listen, listen. And then his words were precious. And what you and I talked about is our one-on-one meetings. And I joked, I mean, if somebody were to be watching us from outside the window, I'd think that why are two men sitting in silence for such prolonged periods of time? But I learned with Dr. Scott, I learned with Jim that to just wait, to just wait.
Right.
And if I waited and then I learned, and he taught me. I worked for him for 17 years.
Hmm. It's fantastic.
Uh,
What other things should we know about that period of time?
I did my doctoral work at the University of Hawaii, and it was during that time, and had done several major facility projects. And the University of Hawaii created a program that brought together independent school leaders, public school leaders, and leaders from higher education. And
Mm.
it was really to cultivate leadership in Hawaii.
Right.
And the assumption was that even though all were involved in education, that there were opportunities to collaborate, and that was just not the case. And so
Right.
this was really fostered to do that. And again, it was a cohort model. That's what drew me to the program. That it was a group of people that to this day we still communicate regularly, and some of my dearest, deepest, both professional colleagues and personal friends. When you learn together like that, you form a relationship that lasts a lifetime.
Right.
So, we spent a lot of, hard, invigorating times together, worked hard together. But that's also what I liked about the program, allowed me to pursue my interest in decision making. And
Right.
that really led me to the neuroscience of decision making. And the program was designed that we could pursue issues, topics, and fields that were of interest to us.
You and I met through a mutual friend, Marcus Essien, and when I was sharing with him the need for us to have a decision-making model to incorporate that into the work we do on a monthly basis. When we gather together, the afternoon is spent on what is sometimes referred to as issue processing. I like to call it opportunities and challenges to be more clear. It gives us an opportunity to come together as a group so that the other members of your team then can help you make a better business decision. It's the most powerful part of our monthly meetings, and it was an oh my gosh moment when Marcus shared with me that you did your thesis on decision making. Why did you choose to do that?
Part of what, not only at Punahou, but even I remember when my first board meeting when I was a 27-year-old newly minted division head.
Right,
um, the school was in crisis and faced with some significant decisions about the future. The school now is thriving and doing well, but we hit a really dramatic point. And I remember sitting in that meeting and the depths of discussions and the considerations about, merging, closing, moving on. And it was scary. And it imprinted on me. I was glad to be at the table. I craved to be at the table. But I was curious about decision making. And then at Punahou, these facility projects in particular, but not exclusively limited to them. I mean, groups would gather in a room, and we would have diagrams and budgets and considerations, and making multi-million-dollar decisions. And but it wasn't always clear to me when
How
the
we got
decision
there.
was made, yeah, or how, and spent so many hours like that. Like you could almost tell. I wondered, was the decision made when we hit a moment of fatigue?
Right, right.
Um, and then what I really also focused on, Punahou had a very significant professional development budget. Used to allocate hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for the professional development of faculty and supported sabbaticals and it was excellent. But what I really actually used as the focus of my dissertation is wasn't clear to me how we were making a decision, what was the process, what was the criteria, but more importantly, how did we monitor and measure the outcomes of those decisions so that we knew with more certainty that the investment yielded the desired results.
Hmm. Right. You and I both share an appreciation for the late Daniel Kahneman, who taught us about heuristics, and you really took a deep dive in studying his work during that time. What did that do for you? What what did that yield for you?
Well, it still keeps me up at night because that riddle of his that if the bat costs $1 and the ball is 10 cents, what's the true cost of, and I can grab that. But that was actually the seminal piece of literature around my dissertation. And then I went on in Damasio, and that really took. But the premise of it was this, is that on the one hand, you have Malcolm Gladwell in Blank, and he talks about the value of decisions made quickly and intuitively.
Right,
And on the other side of a continuum, it's not one or the other, but on the other side of a continuum, you've got Kahneman's work,
right,
and he challenges those system one decisions that arrived at quickly are often wrong, and really prompting us to get into that systems two. He says we don't naturally calculate probabilities.
right.
So how can we discipline ourselves to make decisions from systems two? And then I'm going to reach behind me.
Yeah,
This is a prompt. This is this new, but this is, you won't show up. I just got a decision. I just picked up a book, Decisions Over Decimals, Striking the Balance Between Intuition and Information.
nice.
And it's called Quantitative Intuition. And then I just got it this week. I've just started it. It's published by Wiley.
Of course. Oh, that's terrific. We'll have to put it in this month's meeting packet.
Well,
That's
and
great.
and so what's interesting about that book I'm hoping, and I've just started it now,
Right,
is that it really sort of takes us into that middle ground where you can make data-driven decisions from what Kahneman would say is systems to thinking, but also acknowledge the value of intuition and that also plays a significant role in how we make very complex decisions.
right. I don't know. What has been curious to me is the fact that so many of us make these decisions. We rely upon our gut. We feel those of us with gray hair that gut feel for making decisions that we've earned the right and that we should be come up with the better decisions, but maybe not. And I think having a methodology that forces us to think more clearly about how we arrive at a decision is needed. And that's why it was an OMG moment in meeting you. And I've so thoroughly enjoyed working with you as you and I bring these two worlds together. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, there's a school of thought and decision making. It's called naturalistic decision making. And it's why, for example, emergency room doctors or airplane pilots can make quick decisions. But it's as reference, John, is that experience. I mean, they bring to it an experience that can inform a decision that can be made um, quickly. At the same time, there is an abundance of research that validates that organizations that have a framework to guide their decision-making processes are going to be more efficient, more productive, and yield better outcomes. Just it would be like taking a trip on the highway, and not really having a map. And you know where you're
Right.
going and maybe even know the way to get there.
Right.
But just having a guideline will overcome some of our, frankly, neurological flaws in the form of heuristics and lead to better decisions.
Dr. Atul Gawande wrote a terrific book recognizing that if the airline industry makes a checklist before they um, fly an airplane, that, gee, why aren't we doing it in medicine? And that was a terrific book as well. Something as simple as a checklist can help us make better decisions and behave in a way that will be more effective.
Uh,
So, you completed your PhD when?
it's a little over 10 years ago now. You know how our devices will prompt us with pictures from our past. So my
Yeah,
iPad the other morning, there I was.
reminded you.
Yeah, there I was in my regalia, looking a little bit younger, but I'd like to think I look a little bit wiser now. So,
Yeah. And so, is there anything that we missed in the trip to Hawaii, the 17 years that you spent there, in this conversation?
uh, I, I mentioned that my granddaughter was born there, and that seems like huge. So now I really feel like we've, you
You're
know,
anchored.
you put it, put an anchor down. But if there's a theme to it all, is gratitude. Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, I just feel it was just an extraordinary opportunity that shaped and a chance to not only meet great people and to learn. So, and it was hard. People ask me all the time, so why did you leave Hawaii? And
Yeah,
there
right.
are days where I ponder that.
So now you're in Nashville. Why? How did you get to back to Nashville?
I hit a point where it's about growth. And I've never been good about it when I start to feel stagnant. But again, 17 years in Hawaii is a long time. So I moved to San Francisco, became the head of San Francisco Day School. And whereas Punahou in and of itself is running the fifth largest independent school of itself with 2,000 students.
Yes.
Um, but it seemed like it was, a great opportunity to move on. And so again, my background with facility work, San Francisco Day School had been trying to build a facility for almost a decade,
Right.
uh, and challenges in the process. And so that work really focused on adding a facility, and solving some complex problems there
Right.
around housing. So it was interesting in San Francisco, in order to add on to a school within the city, you could not reduce the blueprint of residents. And so creative problem solving, what we did there is the school bought adjacent properties, converted them into housing for faculty that also created space for the learning spaces. So built an innovation center, built a theater, expanded playground, grew enrollment. So had, 7 dynamic years in San Francisco, which included the pandemic,
Yep.
which was hard everywhere and certainly hard there. But in my field of work, actually 3 to 5 years is a pretty good tenure, and we did 7. And
Right.
so the next opportunity called.
Yep. And then a short time in Denver.
Yeah, it was at Compositive Primary, which was a brand new startup school on the Anschutz campus. Considine family was very involved in that. Um, and other reasons for us to move to Denver. We had a son who was there, and my brother had just left Denver. We had a good year there and righted the ship. And then opportunity to come back to Nashville presented itself. So I just finished a year at Harding Academy here in Nashville, Tennessee. Again, working on a facility project, really an interim year as the school made a transition from one style of leadership to another. But I should go back and mention why in San Francisco is where I did my executive coaching certification through the Haas School of Business at Berkeley. And again, another one of these amazing cohort-based models.
Right.
Built a really wonderful community around the coaches that still involved with. I was one of the few educators. Actually, I was the only educator in my cohort. And my plan all along was to move into executive coaching. And so when I completed that, I had a small practice while I was in running schools full time. And then the plan, was to always do this. And so this was the year to make the leap. And I do believe things at the right time turn out as they should. And Marcus introduced you to me, and my plan all along was to have an executive coaching practice that focused beyond education,
Right.
because leadership is the theme that um, transpires and links the two. It's ultimately about leadership.
Yeah. It's been so much fun getting to know you this year and working with you. I'm excited about where we're headed. Now you have access to and will be building your own groups in Nashville. And what the industry calls a private peer advisory group, we somewhat shorten to just simply focused groups. And they're such a powerful tool, as I had mentioned before. Combined with leadership coaching, I think that the opportunity for us is tremendous. I'm looking forward to working with you.
Well, the time that we've had together, John, I mean, working with you is like going back to graduate school. And I feel like I've almost, working on an MBA and John Finnegan and Focus Cloud. But you have a great vision for Focus Cloud. You've built an infrastructure and a platform. It's your relational qualities and bringing groups together and the people that you have drawn to this is fascinating. The systems that you've built, and then the background. I mean, what I have learned through the Wiley instruments, the everything disc, when I took that assessment, and I've now written about it, posted on LinkedIn. I'm
Yes.
coaching cohorts, and I talk about it, but I thought it accurately not only described what inspires and motivates me, but also what I need to monitor about how I impact others.
Mhm.
And I thought it was a very balanced approach to evolving leadership, and which hasn't changed since I was 27, right? I think that's the whole point, that no matter
Yes.
what age or stage we are, we can always be learning about and improving upon how we lead.
Right. Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm thrilled and excited about when you and I put together our experience and intellectual property and bring it together. I think we're going to be able to help a lot of organizations address those leadership needs. In order for organizations to grow, they've got to recognize high potential individuals within their organization, but they have to have a program for them in order to retain them first and foremost and grow them into those leadership positions for the organization to grow. And I think that we have a lot to offer there. So,
Already seeing it. I think the speakers that you're bringing in, the content that you're creating, the platforms that you've built, how you're using technology. I mean, just as we jumped on right now, a conversation about AI, and both of us in our own ways are very focused on that, and see how it can help us improve the work that we do and the services we provide.
Right. We're both, all of us, as a culture and as a society, are saddled to this rocket ship that is moving at a faster pace than ever before. And so I don't think there's ever been a greater need for the work that we do. Mike, thank you. Is there a final comment or question that you have before we bring this to a close?
I'll end on two words I've used in this conversation is, I appreciate the gracefulness that I think characterizes Focus Cloud. I mean, there is a purposefulness and there's a generosity to it that really defines the organization, and then gratitude. I mean, I work hard and I have a lot to be grateful for, and sense my connection with Focus Cloud and with you, just feel a lot of gratitude and optimism and imperative for the work ahead and the people that we'll meet, and what will come out of that.
Thank you, my friend,
All righty.
for this time together today.
All right. Thank you.